Breaking nuclear news, another incredibly bullish week for the uranium sector. We will dive right into the news and what is moving this market. But first, let's talk about price action, which is always secondary to the fundamentals. But last week, the Sprott Uranium Miners ETF was up 2.96%, whereas the broader S&P 500 market was only up 1.72%, pointing to what I've been talking about, that once the macroeconomic inflationary panic selling liquidity events are neutralized, well, the highest quality assets will massively outperform the broader market. And so are uranium miners one of the highest quality asset groups? Well, that's the question we've been answering with the nuclear news that we've been seeing and the updates. So first, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, the supply crunch that is looming and already exists. There's the bedrock on which the bullish thesis for uranium exists. If you're a commodities investor, it's just about all you need to know when investing in commodities. And so we had an update this week from the CEO of Yellowcake. In 2021, we raised approximately $375 million to acquire 8.35 million pounds of uranium during the financial year, which with an additional purchase after year end means we now own 18.8 million pounds, doubling the amount since the end of 2021 financial year. So Yellowcake is similar to the Sprott ETF. They're a financial firm that is betting on the supply crunch playing out. So they're buying it cheap. They're taking it off the market, making the immediate supply crunch even worse. And their plan is to sell it at much higher prices. So the confidence we have in our long-term outlook remains very strong. And this is driven by the same supply-demand fundamentals that have supported the performance year to date. We expect to see a sustained increase in uranium demand and price increases in years to come as the global demand for clean energy highlights the need for nuclear energy. We have seen very positive policy developments in the US, the EU, and in China as nuclear is increasingly recognized as a core way to urgently address climate change. Yet despite a clear growing demand picture and recent price rises, supply remains severely constrained and looks set to get even tighter as utility companies around the world start to address their future uncovered fuel requirements. Yellowcake is very well placed to capitalize on these market characteristics. This comes from an industry expert who spends all his time researching the space and all his company's capital investing in uranium. So clearly he sees the supply crunch getting worse. Here is a chart that I found that I want to share with you guys. This comes from the World Nuclear Association / Deep Yellow. Look at how long-term this supply crunch is expected to play out. We're in 2022 when it hasn't gotten as severe as it's going to get, but look at that future. As a long-term investor, this should excite you. It is going to take much higher prices to fill this gap. So the black line is the demand, the uppercase demand, which clearly every day is more and more likely given the nuclear renaissance we've been covering and are about to cover in this video. And so just a massive gap between supply, which is in dark blue secondary, light blue primary. You can just see that uranium is going to have to be worth a fortune to incentivize massive production from the current players. And so miners are going to have to get paid in order to expend the capital needed to fill this gap. So if miners get paid, then the shareholders get paid. And so that is the bull case for uranium miners. And so let's talk about the demand side, right? That demand line. Every day, the models estimates are going to have to go up for demand just based on the news we are seeing that hasn't been priced into these models yet or factored in. So we have this from Morgan Stanley, Big Wall Street, the nuclear revival, tales from the emerging world. They did a report. They studied this. They studied what we've been talking about. Given the challenges of achieving net zero through our current global energy mix, we expect nuclear to become a more favored alternative and play a key role in a coordinated global energy transition. We also believe nuclear power can play a role in helping developing countries achieve energy security without the need to rely on fossil fuels. Several hurdles remain, including safety, cost, and public support. But just as COVID led to seismic changes in how we work, climate concerns and geopolitical events will revive support for nuclear power, a safe, reliable, and carbon-free source of energy. This is Morgan Stanley. And so they have this graph showing emerging markets leading new nuclear capacity additions. Total under construction reactor net capacity. You have China, you have South Korea, India, Turkey, building a nuclear power infrastructure. And so they brought up safety as a hurdle. We have this great chart that Jesse Felder put out showing a comparison between energy sources, deaths per terawatt hour of energy produced. Coal, huge. Oil, huge. Biomass, big. Natural gas, big compared to nuclear, which is at 0.03. Literally extremely safe compared to wind, compared to solar, which should have zero reason for any sort of danger. This speaks to how safe nuclear is. So if a hurdle to nuclear power adoption is safety, well, it's not really a hurdle when you actually look at the statistics. Then you have this chart, greenhouse gas emissions. Coal, obviously huge. Oil, obviously huge. Natural gas, obviously huge. We're talking about damage to the environment. Compare that to hydropower, solar, nuclear, and wind. Nuclear is right in there with solar and wind, and we know it's more sustainable, more dense, and more viable because the other ones are intermittent and have serious problems and rely on the weather to be stable to work. So obviously, just based on this, nuclear is the winner. So let's dive into the global news, which speaks to the nuclear renaissance that is unfolding. Belgium reaches tentative deal with ENGIE on extending nuclear reactors. War in Ukraine prompts government to change course on energy. We know exactly why that is. We love covering the unfolding drama in Germany. Scholz opens door for extending nuclear power in Germany. Chancellor signals possibility of reconsidering plant closures. Political compromise may be needed for nuclear extension. The German chancellor signaled that his government might consider extending the life of the country's 3 remaining nuclear plants as it seeks to bolster its energy security. The economy minister has commissioned an intensified worst-case scenario calculation. Let's have a look at that, Scholz says. And so we've talked about the energy chaos and drama going on in Germany and Europe. It matters because Germany is a huge country and they've been staunch opponents of it. And so again, all these models we're talking about, the supply demand models, haven't factored in potential good news and U-turns in energy policy from big countries in Europe. And so Belgium's one. Could Germany be one? Obviously, it's the question everyone wants to know, but they're signaling it. But again, the nuclear bull story doesn't even need Germany. It would just be icing on the cake. Egypt and Turkey's new nuclear reactor builds make it 59 carbon-free reactors now under construction, of which 24 are expected to come online later this year and next. That is a lot of demand for uranium. Another 89 are in advanced planning / order, 340 more proposed. So just exponential growth in uranium. And so we have small modular reactor technology, which is going to enable the mass adoption of nuclear because it's going to mobilize it and allow it to go all over the world in a very efficient way. Instead of having to build a few huge plants, you can build a bunch of smaller ones and transport them. Holtec advances $7.4 billion plan to build 4 SMRs. That's a lot of money, $7.4 billion. Holtec is moving forward on a $7.4 billion plan to build up 4 modular reactors in New Jersey and a supersized reactor factory. Why it matters? Holtec built a business tearing down nuclear power plants, supplying equipment and providing casks for nuclear waste. But it's never built a nuclear reactor. Now it's joined a handful of companies racing to construct an advanced reactor. Small modular reactors generate about 1/3 of the electricity of a traditional nuclear plant. They're small enough to be assembled in a factory and then transported. And they're seen as posing few safety risks and producing less waste. So technology solving serious problems. Holtec said yesterday that it's seeking a massive federal loan to build its planned SMRs, construct a giant SMR factory, and expand an advanced manufacturing facility. Holtec also announced that it signed a memorandum of agreement with Utility Entergy, which operates nuclear power plants at 5 sites, to evaluate the feasibility of deploying a Holtec SMR in Entergy's service area. The Energy Department Loan Programs Office approved Part 1 of the application in March. Holtec yesterday submitted Part 2. And so I talked about how the federal government wants to buy domestic uranium. Well, they also want to invest in domestic nuclear infrastructure. And so companies are just going to take advantage of this. And this is the nuclear renaissance unfolding before our very eyes in the world's biggest economy, the United States. And so I absolutely love, again, talking about the future. What are the potential use cases of nuclear power? Well, did you know the world's first nuclear propelled merchant cargo ship ran for 8 years, traveling 454,000 miles on a single fuel load of 163 pounds of uranium, avoiding the carbon emissions from burning 29 million gallons of fossil fuels, and was launched in 1959. What does that tell you about the revolutionary nature of this fuel source? That is why it's exciting. That's why everyone's adopting it. That is why there's a massive need for it, and why this supply crunch is so exciting for early stage investors in uranium. Obviously, the one risk to this is some sort of nuclear accident. We talked about how unlikely that is, given how safe nuclear has proved to be. But that is the only risk to this at this time. Otherwise, there's a nuclear renaissance unfolding. We got to get through this macroeconomic mess in order for the high quality assets to not just be sold off in mass panic selling liquidity events. But once we get through that, it should be off to the races for the highest quality assets. If you want to know when uranium stocks will finally be able to rally, because we know they are at least partly correlated to the broader US stock market, well, tomorrow we're going to go through the top 10 macro charts of the week. Look at the underlying macroeconomic data, how it's trending, how different pieces are moving together and working together to understand when we can finally get out of this mess and whether or not markets are going to rally or crash, and see how all the pieces fit together.